The morning sun had barely touched Manhattan's skyscrapers when Maxwell Steele opened his eyes in his luxurious Upper East Side penthouse. With a lazy yawn, he stretched his arms, feeling the soft touch of Egyptian silk sheets against his skin. Another day, another opportunity to dominate the business world. At 38, Maxwell was the embodiment of success in New York. Founder and CEO of Steele Innovations, a multi-billion-dollar tech company, he had built his empire from scratch. His chiseled face and piercing blue eyes were often seen on the covers of business magazines, always accompanied by headlines proclaiming him as the Midas King of Manhattan. As he prepared for the day, Maxwell reflected on his journey. Born into a middle-class family in Brooklyn, he learned early on that the world belonged to those who seized it. His relentless determination and sharp intellect led him to Yale, where he graduated with honors before launching his first startup at 22. "Mr. Steele, your coffee is ready, and the Wall Street Journal has just arrived," announced his personal assistant Rebecca through the intercom. "Thank you, Rebecca. I'll be in the dining room in 5 minutes," Maxwell replied, adjusting his Hermes tie in the mirror. Sitting at the marble dining table, Maxwell flipped through the newspaper, his eyes quickly catching the day's headlines. A satisfied smile crossed his lips as he saw that Steele Innovations stock had risen another 3% overnight. Another day, another few million, he murmured to himself, taking a sip of his perfectly brewed Colombian coffee. Maxwell's phone vibrated with a text message from his current girlfriend, an international model. She wanted to have dinner that night at the new exclusive restaurant du jour. Maxwell responded with a brief, "Okay," barely remembering her name. To him, relationships were like business transactions, useful while they lasted, easily replaceable when they no longer served a purpose. As his driver took him to the office downtown, Maxwell observed the streets of New York through his limousine window. People hurried along the sidewalks, anonymous and insignificant in his eyes. He wondered how many of them would give anything to be in his place, unaware of the emptiness he sometimes felt in his heart. At the office, Maxwell dove into his work with his usual intensity. Meetings followed one after another. Decisions were made, millions were moved with the click of a mouse. His team watched him with a mixture of admiration and fear, knowing that his genius was matched only by his impatience with mediocrity. "Mr. Steele," said his secretary, entering his office late in the afternoon, "remember you have the charity event tonight." Maxwell frowned. He had completely forgotten. "Ah, yes, the annual New York Children's Foundation Gala. I can't believe I agreed to this." "It's a great networking opportunity, sir," the secretary gently reminded him. Yes, I know," Maxwell replied, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Charity events were necessary to maintain a positive public image, but he saw them as nothing, more than a necessary inconvenience. Hours later, Maxwell entered the Plaza Hotel's ballroom, impeccable in his Armani tuxedo. Cameras flashed as he walked the red carpet, offering his rehearsed smile to the press. Inside, New York's elite mingled, champagne flutes in hand, discussing the latest gossip and business. Maxwell navigated the crowd with ease, exchanging superficial greetings and empty promises of future lunches. He made his usual donation, a check generous enough to guarantee headlines, but not enough to tickle his vast fortune. That's when something unexpected happened. As he headed to the bar, Maxwell bumped into a woman, knocking her purse down. Automatically, he bent down to help her gather her belongings. "I'm sorry," he said, handing her a lipstick that had rolled near his expensive shoes. "No, it was my fault," she replied, her voice soft and gentle. When their eyes met, Maxwell felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a genuine connection. The woman, dressed modestly compared to the socialites around her, had warm brown eyes and a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "I'm Sarah," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "Sarah Johnson. I work for the foundation." "Maxwell Steele," he replied, surprised to find himself actually interested in knowing more about her. Before they could continue the conversation, the master of ceremonies announced the start of the speeches. Maxwell found himself reluctant to walk away, a completely new sensation for him. As he sat at his designated table, surrounded by other millionaires and celebrities, Maxwell found himself searching for Sarah in the crowd. For the first time in years, the numbers in his bank account and his company's stock seemed insignificant. As the event came to an end, Maxwell left the Plaza Hotel with a strange feeling. Something had changed. He didn't know exactly what, but as his limousine glided through the lit streets of New York, Maxwell Steele, the ruthless business titan, wondered if perhaps, just maybe, there was more to life than just accumulating wealth. Little did he know that this casual encounter would be the first step in a journey that would change his life forever. The morning after the charity event, Maxwell woke up with an unusual feeling. The image of Sarah Johnson, with her captivating smile and gentle eyes, persisted in his mind. Intrigued by this atypical reaction, he decided to do something he had never done before: personally investigate someone he had met at an event. "Rebecca," he called over the intercom, "I need you to find out everything you can about a Sarah Johnson who works at the New York Children's Foundation." Hours later, Maxwell was sitting in his office, examining the report Rebecca had compiled. Sarah Johnson, 32 years old, single mother of a 5-year-old boy named Tommy. She lived in a small apartment in the Bronx and had been working as a program coordinator at the foundation for 3 years. Her salary was modest, especially by New York standards. Impulsively, Maxwell picked up the phone and called the foundation. "Hello, Sarah Johnson speaking," the familiar voice answered. "Ms. Johnson, this is Maxwell Steele. We met last night at the event." There was a surprised pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Steele, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you?" "Actually, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I'd like to discuss some philanthropic ideas." Another pause. This time longer. "Of course, I'd be delighted, but I should warn you that my son is sick today, so I'm working from home." Maxwell saw an opportunity. "Don't worry. How about I stop by? We can talk while your son rests." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. 2 hours later, Maxwell was standing in front of a worn-down building in the Bronx, as far from his world as possible. He climbed the creaky stairs to the 3rd floor, the smell of mold and fried food assaulting his senses. Sarah opened the door, looking surprised to see him there, impeccable in his Brioni suit. "Mr. Steele, please come in." The apartment was small but clean and cozy. Toys were scattered across the living room floor, and a pile of bills sat on the kitchen table. Maxwell noticed that Sarah looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "Tommy is sleeping now," she explained, guiding him to the small kitchen. "Can I offer you some coffee?" Maxwell nodded, sitting at the kitchen table. As Sarah prepared the coffee, he observed the environment, noticing the photos of Tommy on the walls, children's books piled on a shelf, the calendar on the fridge full of appointments and reminders. "So, Mr. Steele," Sarah began, placing a cup, serve coffee in front of him. "You mentioned philanthropic ideas." Maxwell took a sip of the coffee, surprising himself by realizing it was remarkably good. "Yes, I'm considering increasing my involvement with the foundation. I wanted to hear your perspective on the most urgent needs." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, there are so many areas where we could make a difference. We have families struggling to put food on the table, children who need school supplies, single mothers who can't afford childcare." As Sarah spoke passionately about the foundation's programs, Maxwell found himself more interested in her personal story. "And you, Sarah? How did you come to the foundation?" She hesitated for a moment. "Well, I was one of the people the foundation helped. When I got pregnant with Tommy, I was alone and scared. The foundation supported me, helped me finish my studies. Now working here is my way of giving back." At that moment, a faint cry came from the room next door. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, standing up. Tommy must have woken up. Maxwell followed her to the small bedroom where he saw Sarah picking up a dark-haired boy. Tommy looked pale and feverish. "Hey, champ," Sarah murmured, kissing her son's forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Mommy, my tummy hurts," Tommy whimpered. Maxwell observed the scene, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was something about the way Sarah cared for Tommy that deeply touched him. "Miss Johnson," he said suddenly, "I'd like to help." Sarah looked at him confused. "Help? Yes, let me pay for a private doctor for Tommy." And maybe we can find a better apartment for you in a safer neighborhood." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mr. Steele, that's very generous, but I can't accept. It's too much." "Please," Maxwell insisted, surprising himself with his own sincerity. "Consider this as part of my commitment to the foundation. Tommy deserves the best care, and you deserve a safe place to raise him." Sarah hesitated, looking from Tommy to Maxwell. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Maxwell replied softly. "Let me help." After a long moment, Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay. Thank you, Mr. Steele." When Maxwell left the apartment that afternoon, he felt different. Seeing Sarah and Tommy, understanding their daily struggles, had stirred something inside him. For the first time in years, he felt he was doing something truly meaningful. On the way back to Manhattan, Maxwell made several calls, arranging a doctor for Tommy and initiating the search for a new apartment for Sarah. He didn't fully understand why he was so invested in helping this particular family, but he knew he couldn't ignore the impulse. Little did he know that this impulsive decision to help a single mother and her sick child was about to trigger a series of events that would change his life forever. The secret that Sarah kept, a secret that she herself barely understood the magnitude of, was about to come to light, and when it did, nothing would be the same for Maxwell Steele. In the weeks following the meeting in the small Bronx apartment, the lives of Sarah and Tommy Johnson underwent a surprising transformation. Maxwell Steele, true to his word, mobilized his vast resources to help the small family. The first step was to ensure top-notch medical care for Tommy. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a renowned Manhattan pediatrician, quickly diagnosed a stomach infection and prescribed the appropriate treatment. Within days, Tommy was back to his energetic and smiling self. "Mommy, look how fast I can run now," exclaimed Tommy, running back and forth in the spacious new apartment that Maxwell had found for them in the Upper West Side. Sarah watched her son with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "Be careful not to bump into anything, sweetie," she gently warned, still not used to the luxurious space around her. The apartment was a dream come true. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a modern kitchen, and best of all, a small balcony overlooking Central Park. It was a completely different world from the cramped apartment in the Bronx. As Tommy explored every corner of his new home, Sarah sat on the soft couch, lost in thought. Maxwell's generosity left her speechless, but it also filled her with growing guilt. There was a secret she kept, a secret that became increasingly heavy with each act of kindness from Maxwell. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Maxwell, impeccable as always in his tailored suit. "Mr. Steele," Sarah greeted him, feeling her heart involuntarily race. "Please, come in." Maxwell entered, his eyes scanning the apartment with approval. "How are you adjusting?" "It's amazing," Sarah replied honestly. "I don't know how to thank you enough." At that moment, Tommy came running from the kitchen. "Mr. Max," he shouted, hugging Maxwell's legs. To Sarah's surprise, Maxwell crouched down to Tommy's level, a genuine smile lighting up his usually serious face. "Hey, champ, how are you feeling?" "Much better," Tommy replied enthusiastically. "Dr. Chen said I'm her bravest patient." Maxwell laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. "I'm sure you are." Sarah watched the interaction with a mix of emotions. There was something in the way Maxwell looked at Tommy that unsettled her. Was it a look of recognition? Connection? She shook her head, pushing these thoughts away. "Tommy, why don't you go play in your room for a while?" Sarah gently suggested. "Mr. Steele and I need to talk." After Tommy left, Sarah turned to Maxwell. "Mr. Steele, I don't know how to express my gratitude, but I also feel uncomfortable accepting so much help." Maxwell observed her for a moment before responding. "Sarah, please call me Maxwell. And as for the help, consider it an investment in Tommy's future and in your potential." There was something in the way he said Tommy's future that made Sarah feel strangely exposed. Could he suspect something? "Still," she insisted, "I feel like I should do something in return. Maybe I could work for you in some way." Maxwell seemed to consider the idea. "Actually, I've been thinking about expanding Steele Innovations' philanthropic Work. Perhaps you could help me develop some programs. Sarah nodded enthusiastically, grateful for the opportunity to contribute. It would be an honor. As they discussed the details of the possible work arrangement, Maxwell couldn't help but notice certain similarities between Tommy and himself as a child. The shape of the eyes, the tilt of the smile. He found himself staring at a photo of Tommy on the wall, trying to decipher why the boy seemed so familiar to him. Sarah, noticing Maxwell's fixed gaze on the photo, felt a wave of panic. "Mr. Steele, Maxwell," she said quickly, trying to divert his attention. "Would you like some coffee?" Maxwell turned his attention back to her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Yes, thank you." "Sarah, if you don't mind me asking, Tommy's father—" Sarah froze for a moment, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the cups. He's not in the picture," she answered vaguely. It was a complicated situation. Maxwell nodded slowly, his eyes still studying Sarah's face. "I see. It must have been difficult for you." "It was," Sarah admitted softly, "but Tommy is the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't regret anything." As they drank coffee, the conversation flowed to lighter topics, but Maxwell couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sarah and Tommy's story than she was telling. Something about the whole situation intrigued him deeply. As he left the apartment that night, Maxwell found himself torn between the desire to help more and a growing curiosity about Sarah's past. He had never felt so connected to someone so quickly, especially to a child like Tommy. In the elevator, Maxwell made a decision. He would find out more about Sarah Johnson and her son, not out of distrust, but from an inexplicable desire to better understand this family that had entered his life so unexpectedly. Back in his own luxurious apartment, Maxwell sat in his office, looking out at the illuminated city through the panoramic window. He picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. "Jack, it's Maxwell. I need you to do a discreet investigation for me. Sarah Johnson and her son, Tommy. I want to know everything. Medical history, school records, anything you can find about the child's father." Hanging up the phone, Maxwell leaned back in his chair, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions in his chest. Part of him felt guilty for invading Sarah's privacy this way, but another part, a part he didn't fully understand, needed to know more. Meanwhile, in the new Upper West Side apartment, Sarah lay in bed, unable to sleep. Maxwell's kindness touched her deeply, but the growing fear that her secret might be discovered consumed her. She looked at Tommy's photo on her bedside table, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself. "What will I do if he finds out?" The secret Sarah kept was bigger than she could have ever imagined, and the consequences of its revelation were about to shake the foundations of everyone involved. As Maxwell delved deeper into his investigation, and Sarah struggled with her, conscience fate was about to unite their lives in a way neither of them could have predicted. Weeks turned into months, and an unexpected routine began to form in Maxwell Steele's life. His visits to Sarah and Tommy's apartment, initially motivated by a sense of duty and curiosity, became increasingly frequent and, surprisingly, anticipated. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Maxwell found himself in Central Park with Sarah and Tommy. The boy ran ahead, his energy seemingly inexhaustible, while the adults walked side by side. "Tommy, don't go too far," Sarah called out, a loving smile on her face. Maxwell observed the interaction, feeling a strange mixture of joy and melancholy. "He reminds me a lot of myself as a child," he commented, almost without realizing he was speaking aloud. Sarah looked at him, an expression of surprise on her face. "Really? You don't talk much about your childhood." Maxwell hesitated for a moment before responding. "There's not much to tell. My parents were always busy, so I spent a lot of time alone, inventing my own games and adventures." Something in Maxwell's voice made Sarah stop and look at him more closely. "It must have been lonely." "It was," he admitted, surprising himself with his own honesty. "I guess that's why I became so focused on achieving success. It was a way to prove my worth." Sarah gently placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort. that sent a wave of warmth through Maxwell's body. "You don't need to prove your worth to anyone, Maxwell. What you've done for Tommy and me, that shows who you really are." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world around them seemed to disappear. The moment was broken by Tommy's excited shout, "Mr. Max, look what I found!" The boy came running, holding a colorful feather. Maxwell crouched down to examine Tommy's find. "Wow, that's cool. It looks like a cardinal feather. Did you know that male cardinals are bright red to attract females?" Tommy's eyes widened in admiration. "You know everything, Mr. Max." Sarah watched the interaction with a mix of joy and apprehension. Seeing Tommy so at ease with Maxwell warmed her heart, but it also intensified her guilt about the secret she was keeping. As the afternoon progressed, the three decided to have an impromptu picnic. Sitting on a blanket under the shade of a large oak tree, they shared sandwiches and laughter. And then the investor said, "That's not a bear, it's the stock market." Maxwell concluded a joke, making Sarah laugh, and Tommy looked confused. "I don't get it," Tommy said, frowning. Maxwell ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "One day you will, champ. For now, just enjoy being a kid." As Tommy ran off to play with other nearby children, Sarah turned to Maxwell. "You're great with him, you know. Tommy adores you." Maxwell felt a lump in his throat. "He's an incredible kid. You've done a wonderful job raising him on your own." Sarah lowered her eyes, the guilt evident on her face. "It wasn't always easy. There were times when I didn't know if I could—" "But you did," Maxwell gently interrupted. "And now you're not alone anymore. I'm here for both of you." The words came out before he could think, and Maxwell was surprised by the truth behind them. At some point, without him realizing it, Sarah and Tommy had become important to him in a way no one else had been. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken emotion. Sarah struggled internally, debating whether she should reveal her secret. Maxwell in turn thought about the investigation he had initiated, feeling increasingly guilty about invading Sarah's privacy. Maxwell began, but was interrupted by Tommy's return. "Mommy, Mr. Max, can we get ice cream?" the boy asked, his eyes shining with anticipation. "Of course we can," Maxwell replied quickly, grateful for the distraction. As they walked towards the ice cream cart, Maxwell unconsciously placed his hand on Sarah's back, gently guiding her. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by Sarah, who felt a shiver run down her spine. Watching Tommy savor his chocolate ice cream, smearing his face in the process, Maxwell felt a wave of affection that caught him by surprise. He grabbed a napkin and, without thinking, wiped the boy's face. "Thank you, Mr. Max," Tommy smiled, revealing chocolate-stained teeth. Sarah watched the scene, her heart tightening. The ease with which Maxwell had fit into their lives, the way he cared for Tommy. All of this made her secret even heavier. At the end of the afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the New York sky in shades of orange and pink, the three walked back to the apartment. Tommy, exhausted from the day's adventure, fell asleep in Maxwell's arms. Sarah looked at the two, feeling a mixture of love and fear. "He really likes you," she said softly. Maxwell looked at the sleeping boy in his arms, feeling a connection he couldn't explain. "And I like him. Both of you, actually." Arriving at the apartment, Maxwell gently put Tommy to bed, carefully covering him. When he returned to the living room, he found Sarah standing by the window, looking out at the city. "Sarah," he said, approaching her. "There's something I need to tell you." She turned, her eyes meeting his. "What is it, Maxwell?" He hesitated, struggling internally. Should he tell her about the investigation? Ask directly about Tommy's father? I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you," he finally said. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "Maxwell, But before she could continue, Maxwell's phone rang. It was Jack, the private investigator. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," Maxwell said, reluctantly moving away. As Maxwell spoke on the phone in a low voice, Sarah struggled with her emotions. She knew she needed to tell the truth, but the fear of losing everything they had built paralyzed her. Maxwell hung up the phone, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He looked at Sarah, a new understanding in his eyes. "Sarah," he said softly, I think we need to talk." The air between them grew dense with tension and unrevealed secrets. The moment of truth had arrived, and everyone's lives were about to change. Forever. Maxwell Steele's office atop the Steel Innovation skyscraper was a sanctuary of power and success. But that morning, as he looked out the panoramic window at the city sprawling below, Maxwell felt anything but powerful. On his desk, a thick folder containing the results of Jack's investigation awaited his attention. Maxwell stared at it as if it were a bomb about to explode. Part of him wanted to throw it all away, forget he had ever doubted Sarah. But curiosity and a strange feeling that he was on the brink of an important revelation compelled him to continue. With a deep sigh, he finally opened the folder. The first pages contained information he already knew: Sarah's history at the foundation, her previous address in the Bronx, Tommy's school records. But as he progressed, Maxwell began to notice discrepancies. Tommy's medical records showed he was born in a private hospital in Manhattan, not in the public hospital in the Bronx, as Sarah had casually mentioned. The expenses had been paid in cash. Strange, Maxwell muttered to himself. Continuing, he found something even more intriguing: a DNA test done when Tommy was only a few weeks old. The test compared Tommy's DNA with... Maxwell froze as he read the name. "This isn't possible," he whispered, his heart racing. The DNA test compared Tommy's DNA with that of Maxwell Steele. Maxwell abruptly stood up, his chair hitting the wall. He paced back and forth, his mind racing. How was this possible? He had never taken a DNA test, and he certainly had never had a relationship with Sarah before meeting her at the charity gala. Or had he? He returned to the folder, frantically searching for more information. And then, buried in the middle of the documents, he found an old photo. In it, a younger Sarah smiled at the camera, dressed in a waitress uniform. The place looked like a bar or nightclub. Suddenly, a long-buried memory surfaced in Maxwell's mind. A night, about 6 years ago, after closing a big deal. He had gone out to celebrate with his team, drinking more than usual. The night was hazy in his memory, but he vaguely remembered a kind-eyed waitress who had helped him call a taxi. "It can't be," he murmured, feeling dizzy. At that moment, his phone rang, making him jump. It was Rebecca, his assistant. "Mr. Steele, Mrs. Johnson is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment but insists it's urgent." Maxwell hesitated for a moment before responding. "Send her in, Rebecca." Seconds later, Sarah entered the office. Her eyes were red and swollen, as if she had been crying, and she looked both nervous and determined. "Maxwell," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." Maxwell observed her for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, but also a strange sense of relief at finally being about to hear the truth. "Sit down, Sarah," he said, indicating the chair in front of his desk. "I think we both have a lot to discuss." Sarah sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. She took a deep breath before starting. 6 years ago, I worked as a waitress in a nightclub to pay for my studies. One night, you came in with a group of executives. You were celebrating some big deal." Maxwell gently interrupted her. "The bar on Fifth Avenue, right? I vaguely remember that night." Sarah nodded, surprised. "Yes, exactly. You were very drunk at the end of the night. I helped you call a taxi, but you could barely stand. So I accompanied you to your apartment to make sure you arrived safely." Maxwell closed his eyes, fragments of memory returning. "And yes," Sarah confirmed, tears now flowing freely down her face. "It was just one night and you were so drunk I figured you wouldn't even remember. The next morning you were still asleep when I left. I left my number, but you never called. And then you found out you were pregnant," Maxwell concluded, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together. Sarah nodded. "I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. I thought about looking for you, but you were Maxwell Steele, a billionaire, one of the most powerful men in New York, and I was just a waitress struggling to survive. What chance would I have?" Maxwell stood up, walking to the window. His mind was in turmoil. "So Tommy is your son," Sarah completed, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Maxwell. I should have told you. But when we met again at the gala and you started helping us, I got scared, afraid of losing everything, afraid you'd take Tommy away from me." Maxwell turned to face her, his expression a mixture of pain and understanding. "I would never do that, Sarah, but you should have told me. I had the right to know." "I know," she replied, sobbing, "and I regret it every day. But seeing you with Tommy in the last few weeks, seeing how you connected, I realized I couldn't hide the truth anymore." Maxwell walked back to his desk, picking up the photo of Sarah as a waitress. "I hired an investigator," he admitted. "Part of me felt there was more to our story. And then today I discovered this." He showed her the DNA test. Sarah gasped, surprised. "How? Apparently you had a test done when Tommy was born. Why?" Sarah lowered her eyes. I wanted to be sure. And maybe deep down I hoped that one day I would have the courage to tell you the truth." Silence fell over the office, heavy with the day's revelations. Maxwell sat down again, his mind processing everything he had discovered. "What do we do now?" Sarah finally asked, her voice small and uncertain. Maxwell looked at her, seeing not just the mother of his child, but also the woman for whom he had developed deep feelings in recent weeks. "Now," he said slowly, "we figure out how to be a family." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibilities. The path ahead would be complicated, full of challenges and adjustments, but at that moment, both Maxwell and Sarah felt a weight lifted from their shoulders. The truth, as difficult as it was, had finally come to light, and with it the chance for a new beginning. The sun was setting over New York, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, when Maxwell and Sarah left the Steele Innovations skyscraper. The contrast between the serenity of the twilight and the emotional storm inside them couldn't have been greater. "We need to talk to Tommy," Maxwell said softly as they entered his limousine. Sarah nodded, her face a mixture of fear and relief. "Yes, he deserves to know the truth. But Maxwell, how are we going to explain this to a 5-year-old? Maxwell ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of nervousness. "Honestly, I don't know, but we'll do it together." The trip to Sarah's apartment was silent, both lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, they found the babysitter, Maria, playing with Tommy in the living room. "Mommy, Mr. Max!" Tommy shouted joyfully, running to hug them. Maxwell crouched down to receive the boy's hug, feeling a wave of emotion as he realized he was embracing his son. His son. The words still seemed surreal in his mind. "Hi, champ," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Did we have a good day today?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically, starting to tell about his day at school and the drawings he had made. Sarah thanked and dismissed Maria, exchanging a meaningful look with Maxwell. "Tommy, dear," Sarah began, sitting on the couch and pulling her son onto her lap. "Mr. Max and I need to talk to you about something very important." The boy looked curiously from his mother to Maxwell, who sat down beside them. "Remember when we talked about different families?" Sarah continued. "How some children have a mommy and a daddy, others have 2 mummies or 2 daddies, and some have just 1 parent." Tommy nodded. "Like us. It's just you and me, Mommy." Maxwell felt a pang in his chest at those words. Sarah took a deep breath. "Well, the truth is, Tommy, that you have a father, and he's here with us now." Tommy's eyes widened, looking around confused. "Where?" "Here, Tommy," Maxwell said softly, leaning forward. "I'm your father." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Tommy looked at Maxwell, then at his mother, and back to Maxwell. But you're Mr. Max," Tommy finally said, his voice small and confused. "Yes, I am," Maxwell replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "But I'm also your father. I didn't know until today. Your mother and I met a long time ago, before you were born." Tommy frowned, processing the information. "Then why weren't you here before?" The innocent question hit both Maxwell and Sarah, like a stab. "It's complicated, sweetie," Sarah explained, hugging Tommy tighter. "Sometimes adults make mistakes and make difficult decisions, but the important thing is that we're all here now." "Are you going to live with us now?" Tommy asked Maxwell, his eyes big and full of hope. Maxwell looked at Sarah, uncertain. We still need to work out a lot of things, Tommy." but I promise I'll always be present in your life from now on." Tommy was silent for a moment, his little face a mask of concentration. Then, to the surprise of both adults, he smiled. "Cool, now I have a dad like Billy in my class." The simplicity of Tommy's reaction broke the tension in the air. Sarah let out a laugh that was half sob, and Maxwell felt his eyes fill with tears. "Yes, champ," Maxwell said, pulling both Tommy and Sarah into a hug. "Now you have a father." The three stayed like that for a long moment, a newly formed family adjusting to their new reality. Later, after Tommy was put to bed, full of questions about having a father and excited about the idea of telling his friends, Maxwell and Sarah sat on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "He handled it better than I expected," Sarah said, breaking the silence. Maxwell nodded. "Kids have an incredible capacity for adaptation. But I know there will be more questions, more challenges ahead." "Maxwell," Sarah began, turning to face him, "what happens now with the three of us, I mean?" Maxwell looked at her, seeing not just the mother of his child, but the woman he had fallen in love with in recent weeks. "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "But I know I want to be part of Tommy's life, and—" He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I want to be part of your life too, Sarah, if you'll have me." Sarah felt her heart race. "Maxwell, I have feelings for you, strong feelings, but all of this is so complicated. What if it doesn't work out? What if we hurt Tommy in the process?" Maxwell took her hands in his. "Sarah, nothing in life is guaranteed. But what I feel for you, for Tommy, it's real. More real than anything I've ever felt. We can take it slow. Take one step at a time. But I want to try." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. Slowly, she nodded. "I want to try too." They leaned towards each other, their lips meeting in a soft kiss full of promise and possibilities. When they parted, Maxwell smiled. "You know, I think I need to make some changes in my life." "What kind of changes?" Sarah asked, curious. "Well, for starters, I think it's time to rethink my priorities. Spend more time with Tommy, with you. Maybe even expand the company's philanthropic work." Sarah smiled. "Looks like the great Maxwell Steele is becoming a family man." Maxwell chuckled softly. "Who would have thought, huh? But you know what? I've never felt so happy or fulfilled." As the night progressed, Maxwell and Sarah continued talking, planning their future together and how they would integrate their lives. There were still many challenges ahead, announcing the news to the world, dealing with the press, adjusting their routines. But for the first time, both felt truly hopeful. Inside the apartment, Tommy slept peacefully, unaware of the big changes that were coming in his life. But somehow in his sleep, he smiled, as if he knew that his little family was finally complete. The weeks that followed the big revelation were an emotional roller coaster for Maxwell, Sarah, and Tommy. The transition from Mr. Max to Daddy wasn't instant or easy, but every small progress was celebrated. A sunny Saturday morning found the three in the park, Tommy running ahead with a soccer ball, while Maxwell and Sarah walked hand in hand behind him. "Daddy, look what I can do!" Tommy shouted, balancing the ball on his foot for a few seconds before letting it drop. Maxwell's heart swelled with pride. "Amazing, champ! You're getting better every day." Sarah gently squeezed Maxwell's hand. "He loves it when you praise him, you know." Maxwell nodded, his expression a mixture of joy and regret. "I just wish I had been there from the beginning. All the first steps, the first words." "Hey," Sarah said softly, stopping and turning to him. "We can't change the past, but we're here now, and you're doing an amazing job." Maxwell smiled, pulling her into a quick hug. "Thank you, I don't know what I'd do without you." The moment was interrupted by Tommy, who came running back. "Daddy, can you teach me to kick like you?" "Of course I can, Tommy. Let's go." As father and son practiced kicks, Sarah watched them with a smile. The scene seemed so natural, as if it had always been this way. However, not everything was perfect. The news of Maxwell Steele's paternity had leaked to the press, and the tabloids were having a field day. Sensational headlines and wild speculations seemed to be everywhere. Back at the apartment, Maxwell frowned as he saw the notifications on His phone. They're not going to leave us alone, are they? Sarah sighed, putting Tommy to bed after a busy day. I guess it comes with the package of being Maxwell Steele. Maybe it's time to face this head-on, Maxwell pondered. A press conference, perhaps. Tell our story on our own terms. Sarah hesitated. Do you think we're ready for that? Tommy is just starting to adjust. Maxwell pulled her close. I understand your concerns, but the more we avoid it, the more they'll speculate. We can control the narrative, protect Tommy as much as possible. After a long discussion, they agreed to do a single interview with a respected journalist. The preparation was intense, with Maxwell and Sarah rehearsing answers to every possible question. On the day of the interview, the nervousness was palpable. Tommy was with Maria, shielded from the media circus. We're on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the director announced. The interviewer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, began, Good evening, America. We're here with Maxwell Steele and Sarah Johnson to discuss the surprising news that has shaken New York. Mr. Steele, Mrs. Johnson, thank you for being here. Maxwell nodded, his hand firmly intertwined with Sarah's. Thank you for having us. Diana. So let's get right to the point, Diana continued. How did this extraordinary situation come about? Sarah took a deep breath before answering. It was one night 6 years ago. I was a waitress trying to pay for my studies. Maxwell was celebrating a successful deal. Circumstances brought us together briefly, and Tommy was the unexpected, but blessed result of that encounter. Maxwell continued, I didn't know about Tommy's existence until recently. When I rediscovered Sarah and Tommy through a charity event, I felt an inexplicable connection. But it was only a few weeks ago that the truth came to light. Diana leaned forward. And how are you dealing with this revelation? It's been quite a journey, Maxwell admitted. Finding out you have a 5-year-old son, well, there's no manual for that. But Tommy is an amazing child, and we're learning together, day by day. Sarah added, It hasn't been easy. There's a lot of guilt, a lot of what-if questions. But we're focused on building a future for our family, not on lamenting the past. The interview continued, covering topics from Tommy's initial reaction to the family's future plans. Maxwell and Sarah were honest, admitting their mistakes and expressing hope for the future. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, both let out a sigh of relief. You were great, Diana assured them. Authentic and honest. People will respond well to that. Back at the apartment, they found Tommy asleep on the couch, waiting for them. Maxwell gently picked him up, carrying him to bed. How did it go? Maria asked quietly. Better than we expected, Sarah replied. Now it's wait and see how the world will react. After Maria left, Maxwell and Sarah sat on the balcony, looking out at the city. You know, Maxwell began, a few months ago, I thought I had everything. Success, money, power. But now, Sarah looked at him curiously. Now what? Maxwell smiled, pulling her close. Now I know what really matters. Family, love, real connection. Tommy and you've given me a purpose I didn't even know I was missing. Sarah snuggled up to him. We still have a long way to go. Yes, Maxwell agreed. But we're in this together, and that's all that matters. As the night progressed, the two remained there, contemplating their future together and the many adventures that were yet to come in their journey as a family. The months that followed the interview were a period of adjustments and growth for the newly formed Steele Johnson family. Maxwell, determined to be the father Tommy deserved, completely reorganized his life and priorities. On a Wednesday morning, the Steele Innovations meeting room was full of executives anxiously waiting for their CEO. To everyone's surprise, Maxwell walked in carrying a superhero lunchbox and holding an excited Tommy's hand. Ladies and gentlemen, Maxwell announced, I apologize for the delay. We had a last-minute emergency at school. Tommy waved shyly to the room. Hi, everyone. The executives, initially shocked, soon smiled and waved back. Maxwell continued the meeting as if nothing unusual was happening, occasionally stopping to help Tommy with his homework or to answer a whispered question. This scene became increasingly common. Maxwell made significant changes in the company, implementing family-friendly policies and encouraging a better work-life balance for all employees. At home, the family dynamic continued to evolve. One evening, as Sarah was preparing dinner, she heard laughter coming from Tommy's room. Peeking through the half-open door, she saw Maxwell and Tommy building an elaborate pillow fort. "And here," Maxwell explained, placing a sheet over the structure, "is where we keep our secret treasure." Tommy laughed, his eyes shining with joy. "What treasure, Daddy?" Maxwell pulled a book from behind his back. The treasure of bedtime stories, of course. Sarah felt her heart fill with love as she watched the scene. Story nights had become a sacred ritual for father and son, a moment of connection they both adored. However, not everything was happy moments. There were difficult days, with Tommy testing limits and Maxwell struggling to find the balance between being a father and CEO. One particularly challenging afternoon, after Tommy had a tantrum at school, Maxwell sat with his son on the park swing. "Tommy," he began softly, "do you want to tell me what happened today?" Tommy kicked the sand, avoiding his father's gaze. I got angry because Billy said you're not my real dad." Maxwell felt his heart tighten. Gently, he lifted Tommy's chin so their eyes met. "Tommy, listen. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love, care, and being there for each other. I'm your father in all the ways that matter, and nothing anyone says can change that." Tommy hugged him tight, silent tears wetting Maxwell's shirt. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, champ. More than you can imagine." As they walked home hand in hand, Maxwell reflected on how far they had come and how much they still had ahead. But with love, patience, and dedication, he knew they would continue to strengthen their bonds day after day. The rising sun cast a golden glow over the New York skyline as Maxwell woke up. Beside him, Sarah was still sleeping peacefully. He smiled, remembering the day they had ahead, Tommy's 6th birthday. Quietly, Maxwell got up and went to his son's room. Tommy was sitting on his bed hugging his favorite teddy bear, his eyes shining with anticipation. "Happy birthday, champ," Maxwell whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. Tommy threw himself into his father's arms. "Thank you, Daddy. Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" Maxwell laughed. "Of course we can. Let's surprise Mommy." In the kitchen, father and son worked together, making a stack of Mickey Mouse-shaped pancakes. The smell attracted Sarah, who entered smiling. "My two favorite chefs," she said, kissing Tommy's forehead and Maxwell's lips. As they ate, Maxwell observed his little family. A year ago, he didn't even know Tommy existed. Now he couldn't imagine life without him or Sarah. After breakfast, they prepared for the birthday party in Central Park. Maxwell had reserved an high area for a picnic, with games and activities for Tommy and his school friends. In the park, Tommy ran back and forth laughing with his friends. Maxwell and Sarah watched, hand in hand. "He's so happy," Sarah commented. Maxwell nodded. "We all are. Sarah, I've been thinking." At that moment, Tommy came running. "Daddy, Mommy, come play tag with us." Laughing, the three joined the other children, running across the lawn. Maxwell, usually so composed in his suit, now ran awkwardly, making Tommy laugh hysterically. Later, while the children were eating cake, Maxwell pulled Sarah to a quiet corner. "Sarah," he began, his heart racing, "this past year has been the happiest of my life. You and Tommy, you've shown me what really matters." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You've changed our lives too, Maxwell." He took a deep breath. "I want this to be forever." Maxwell knelt down, taking a small box from his pocket. "Sarah Johnson, would you do me the honor of marrying me?" Sarah gasped, tears now flowing freely. "Oh, Maxwell, yes, 1,000 times yes." They embraced, kissing passionately. The moment was interrupted by a small "ooh" from Tommy, who had approached without them noticing. Maxwell and Sarah laughed, pulling Tommy into a group hug. "What do you think, champ? Want us to be an official family?" Tommy smiled widely. "Yes, this is the best birthday party ever." As the sun began to set over Central Park, the small family remained embraced, their hearts full of love and expectation for the future. Maxwell Steele, once defined only by his business success, now understood the true meaning of wealth, the love of a family, And so, with the New York twilight as a backdrop, a new chapter began for the Steele Johnsons, full of promises, challenges, and, above all, unconditional love. Now that we've reached the end of this exciting journey with Maxwell, Sarah, and Tommy, it's time to reflect on the lessons this story has brought us. We've seen how a casual encounter can completely change the course of our lives. Maxwell, a man who thought he had everything, discovered that the true meaning of life lies in the connections we make and the love we share. Sarah showed us the strength of a mother, capable of overcoming any obstacle for the sake of her child. And Tommy, in his childlike innocence, reminded us of the incredible capacity we have to love and forgive. This story teaches us that it's never too late to start over, to embrace new opportunities, and to open our hearts. It reminds us that family isn't just about blood ties, but about daily choices of love and commitment. If this story touched your heart, if you were moved by the struggles and triumphs of this family, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these emotional and inspiring narratives to you. Each subscription, each like, each comment motivates us to seek out and share more stories that can touch your lives. And don't stop here. We have many other videos waiting for you on our channel, stories of love, overcoming, redemption, and much more. How about taking a look at our next video? You can find it right after this one or on our homepage. Remember, every story we share here is an opportunity to connect, to be moved, and to grow together. So, don't miss out. Subscribe now, turn on the notification bell, and embark with us on another exciting journey in the next story. Until then,